But I would just say, get involved. I mean, that's how I got involved with all this. Just kept doing it and kept talking about it. People asked me about it. And I just kept being engaged, kept being engaged, kept being engaged.
That was a question specifically to you. Please ask David. I'm in a service business, like he was 20 years ago. I'm in a service business and I have the feeling I have to stop being the obstacle to my company. I have to productize it. Like you wrote a book. You were consulting, but you wrote a book. So we know it's 9 hours consulting and then you try for 2 hours to write something, to build something. What would you say? Should one really do it the same time?
I don't understand the question, Simon. So try it again.
People who are in a service business, like they're teaching or consulting, and they have this feeling that they should productize their services, like putting their knowledge into a product, like a book or a course.
Right.
And by doing that, they see that the fantasy is when I have my book, then I will work less. But it needs 4, 5, 10, 15 years to get to that stage. And in that stage, you are working a lot. So would you do it again? What's your advice to young entrepreneurs going through that right now?
I don't know. Keep going. It took me 20, 25 years to realize what I'd figured out and that nobody else had done it and that it was bulletproof. Because I'm not a ta-da kind of person. I was not going to put this in. This is my work of 20 years. I wasn't going to put it in that book unless I really, really knew it worked and that there was that you couldn't punch a hole in it. So it took me that long to get enough experience to trust that what I'd come up with was, first of all, unique, that nobody else had done it. I've kind of, wow, I thought I was the last guy in the world to learn this. Nobody else seemed to have done it. And also by that time, I tested this model with thousands of hours, quite literally, one-on-one, desk side with some of the best and brightest people on the planet you'd ever meet, implementing this methodology and seeing the results that it produced and knowing without exception, it created more space for people, no exception. So at that point, and also doing this and having it become viral in some of the companies, if I named them, you'd say, wow, that company would spit you out in about 2 seconds if you didn't map to the DNA of the best, brightest, and busiest and most successful people on the planet. And this went viral inside of that environment. So I went, ooh, I guess, okay, now I can trust, I can put this in writing. I'm not saying that anybody should get to that level of confidence. I just don't have that big enough an ego to try to think that I could do it before I had that level of trust in terms of what I knew. But I would just say, get involved. I mean, that's how I got involved with all this, just kept doing it and kept talking about it. People asked me about it. And I just kept being engaged, kept being engaged, kept being engaged. And then at some point, once I discovered it was unique, nobody else had done it, I thought, well, and I had some really good business advisors. I had, at some point, we'd sort of changed our company. I'd bought out a couple of partners, and it was pretty much, had shrunk the thing just to me and Catherine, my wife. And, I still had a reputation out there that it was still working. But I said, I don't know what to do with this now. I don't want to give this, I think this thing is really valuable that we've come up with. So I brought together 7 or 8 or 10 of my friends who were good business people and smart and loved me and knew what I was doing. And I just said, spent the money to put them up for a whole day in a nice little, resort hotel right where I lived, and said, okay, slap me around. So I just said, okay, guys, what do I do with all of this? And their basic conclusion was write a book. Oh God, I don't know how to write a book, So that was like, so that's, it took me that long to kind of come up with okay, let me see if I can virtualize what it is that I've come up with and put it out in some sort of form. See how much of the world salutes.
You're a big reader. Do you have a process for reading one book at a time, or do you just pick whatever comes?
Well, frankly, I'm not a big reader, knowing a lot of people I know that are really big readers. Mine are just seldom ad hoc, kind of just follow my intuition about, read a review about something, or somebody in my network mentions something that just kind of rings my bell, and I'll do that. But basically, it's one book at a time. So I'll keep it on my nightstand over there, or wherever I sit down, whenever I might want to read, or put it in my briefcase if I'm traveling. One at a time, if that.
a couple of great books you read in the last month?
Yeah, one I finished, fabulous book. It's called The Antidote by Berkman. So just look up The Antidote. It's basically happiness for people who can't stand the self-help movement. You know, it's a great book. And that was extremely good. It has a lot to do with the power of acceptance, no matter how you feel, as opposed to try to just go be happy when you may not have a lot of stuff to be happy about. In other words, the happy game is a kind of a shallow game to play, but there's more of a satisfaction game to play based upon acceptance of your depression, acceptance of the challenge you're dealing with, acceptance of a lot of that. And that's a lot of, it just sort of mapped to, in a strange way, it maps a lot to what GTD is about. It's just, you know, it's not about, you know, this is not a motivational, I'm not a motivational speaker.
It resonates with me. In my first years of becoming an entrepreneur, I experienced a transition to loneliness. And I was basically alone with these feelings of, should I give up right now? Should I still try? When do I know that it's the right thing? Which experiments to run next? With whom to really work? Who can I trust? All these questions were just with me, with myself.
Right.
And of course, you can take consultants and coaches, and you are not alone with that. But in the very end, you are alone with that. And I was thinking right now about that. Accepting these thoughts and creating space for these thoughts. How do you do that in GTD?
Well, interesting, as you're mentioning that, I mean, we've, for many years in our company, when Catherine and I sat down and said, you know, what are our standards as we started to hire people, and said, we need to let people know how we operate so that they're not surprised by our decisions and so forth. And one of our core principles was we accept that we're all alone in this together. Right? You handle you, I handle me, right? And then that sense of acceptance, it's kind of like there's a Zen idea of sort of the magnificence of the aloneness on the top mountaintop, where just, you're it. And I think that's a place that we all need to existentially come to at some point, because you're going to have to anyway. You know, you're it. You know, you can't trust necessarily that the rest of the world or anybody else or any other source can be or do who you are and what you're about. So that's a lifelong process of learning, as far as I'm concerned, and experience and growth and maturity that I've been in. Certainly I've been in. Some people seem to have gotten there sooner than I did, but I think once you kind of catch that, and GTD is really about putting you in the driver's seat of your life, as opposed to complaining or victimizing yourself. Oh, I'm effect of, well, great, what would you like to have true? Oh, I'd like to have that resolved. Great, what's your next step? And suddenly you're thrown into the saddle as opposed to being run over by the horse, right? And so in a way, GTD is kind of a Trojan horse of personal growth and self-development. What it does is it automatically kind of gets you into the accountability and the role of you know, of taking control of your life.
Would you say GTD is a continuous improvement of yourself, of your emotions, or of your workflow, or all the three?
I don't know that it's any of that. I think it may be more than any of that. It's really about how do I manage my own agreements with myself. And, you know, it doesn't have an emotional content. There's a lot of emotional results that happen when you do it. But I don't care what your mom did to you when you were 8. What's the next action on that piece of paper? Right? I don't care why you're avoiding doing it. You know, that's a black hole to try to dig into from a psychotherapy standpoint about the source of your resistances and your pain and all that. Let's just get you engaged in your life as you've got it right now and get you back in the driver's seat of it. You know, again, as I said, I was just in South Africa and with our partner and good friend William, who's a psychotherapist. And I asked him, I said, well, so what's the difference between psychotherapy and GTD? He said, well, what happens is there's a lot of things that he handles in a psychotherapy context that GTD doesn't deal with necessarily. Maybe the source of where a lot of your things come from and understanding those and accepting those and so forth and going through all that game. But he said, when I have people who've done GTD, it makes it much clearer and cleaner to define what those things are. If they haven't done GTD, they have all of that fog and all of that distraction that gets in the way of finding out what the real issues really are.
At the end, clarity is an outcome of GTD in every single step. Right?
And holacracy too, by the way. Yeah. Both of those are about how do I get clear about what we're doing right now, what I'm doing right now, and being clear about that. Not necessarily liking it. You don't have to like your life to have to clear your head.
And the agreements to your colleagues, which may be implicit and not explicit, not written down, not visualized.
Exactly.
Which is a big difference.
Huge, yeah.